to this now. Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi has confirmed that Nedlac supports calls for mandatory COVID-19 vaccinations in the workplace. That comes just over a week after President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that a task team would be set up to look at the legalities of implementing the strategy. The Minister is joining us tonight to talk more about what has been discussed at Nedlac level. Minister Nxesi, a very good evening to you. Welcome to News at Prime. So, from the reporting today at least, and around especially business wanting to approach the Constitutional Court for clarity, it would appear that we're still quite a long way off from an overall implementation of mandatory vaccinations in the workplace. Am I right?
Yes, but let me clarify. An impression has been given that Nedlac says there must be mandatory vaccination, but there are very clear qualifications and conditions which have been put. The argument is that the health and safety direction of the department should be strengthened so that that vaccination can become mandatory and emphasized where a risk assessment at the workplace requires that. It's not a case of vaccinate or you ship out if you do not want to agree. So that has come very clearly that we need to do it within the health and safety direction, but also that means there's going to be an engagement with the workers in that particular plant. But it must also allow for people to object, because some of the people can have legitimate reasons, like medical reasons, why they would not be able to vaccinate. All those things have to be looked into. And we've further said, this issue, it's a very big issue. It's good that Busa have gone to look for a declarator from the Constitutional Court, which we think that the issue of constitutionality is very important. Whatever we do must be within the constitution of the country, because it's about the rights of the individuals.
And as you mentioned, the Busa Court, with Business Unity South Africa wanting to go to court for a declaratory order from the Constitutional Court. As government, what sort of clarity would you be hoping to glean from that? I mean, you mentioned, for example, the issues around exemptions for people who, for medical reasons, would not be able to take a vaccine. So I'd imagine you'd also want to be clear on how far those grounds can be interrogated by an employer.
Remember that this matter, there's a lot of debate in the country. There are different legal opinions on this particular matter. Even Nedlac has been able to solicit some legal opinion which says this matter, it's a question of the public interest. It's a question of the individual rights versus the collective rights. Therefore, if it's a public interest matter and it's done within the context of the safety, what you call legislation, there might be no problems. But there are others who are arguing very strongly, and that no, it will also violate the individual rights, and therefore it cannot just be implemented like this. We have heard what a number of unions have expressed. We've heard a number of the COSATU unions. We've heard the General Secretary of COSATU, who is a labor convener, saying they are saying no to mandatory, just a blanket position. We have heard a number of affiliates. We have heard what Fedusa has said. You have heard a number of affiliates. So it's very clear that we have to tread carefully as we deal with this matter. But of course, we need to understand, because what the President said, those teams which are dealing with these issues, both in Nedlac and even in government, they will have to talk about it, consider the vaccination very carefully, and he emphasized, consider this issue of the mandatory vaccination. But people need to also understand that this issue of the vaccination is inextricably linked to the issue of the economy. So it's trying to balance the two. That's where the debate is.
It's the rights of the individual versus the greater good, the rights of the broader population, right? There are also people who are saying that we shouldn't have a national position on mandatory vaccinations, and that perhaps it's a conversation that should be left to individual companies and their specific employees. What do you say to that?
Remember that we're talking about the workplace. We're not just talking about the community. And remember that we are also talking about When we're talking about risk assessment, there are people who are dealing with the public on a daily basis. And if people are not vaccinated, they can be a risk even to that particular public. And therefore, these are the issues which we have to talk about. The employer is also trying to protect the public, its customers, but it's also trying to protect other employees. So these are the issues which have to be taken into consideration. However, the employer must also think about what alternative will be put in place if there are genuine, legitimate reasons for people not to be able to vaccinate, like the medical reasons, which I'm thinking of as of immediate.
How much do you worry, Minister, as the Department of Labour, about companies themselves choosing to prioritize perhaps their income, their profits, over the broader public response health plan of the country?
Obviously, we can't talk about just profits above the interest of the people or above the people. We need to talk about the balance. We recognize that business has to make profits in order to be able to survive, for the economy to grow, but it can't be above everything else. That's why we're talking about both the issues of health and the issues of livelihood. So it's a balancing act here, which we're talking about.
And I was asking you that question because yesterday when MTN confirmed that it was instituting a vaccine mandate from 2022, some people were saying, well, we're going to cancel our cell phone contracts, boycott business because this is not fair. What is your response then to people who say, well, we simply won't buy goods or services from a company that enforces these mandates?
I don't want to go there, but that's why we are saying the companies themselves have to be cautious. The companies themselves have to open a dialogue. The companies have to persuade. And all of us, we have to persuade the people. We have to use the power of reasoning. And instead of just imposition, it would be better that people implement as a result of the persuasion and having been convinced. The issue of just imposing it should be the last resort. But let's take time, deal with these issues, have this social dialogue which we have been talking about. And it has proven in the past that social dialogue can be able to come up with positive results. Let's invest on that. Let's invest on education. Let's invest on conscientization. And some of the people are resisting not because they have any scientific reasons. It's because of a lot of misconception and a lot of misinformation. We have to deal with all those issues. Some of the workers, for instance, who resisted before, now have come forward to come and register after they've understood what we are talking about and the dangers of this.
Well, Minister, there are those who say there's been a lot of COVID-19 vaccine information going about for the better part of the last 6 months or so, and that people are simply not going to change their minds. They then also say that the longer we don't have a definitive program or line of march, shall we say, on mandatory vaccination, the longer the broader population is exposed to increased COVID-19 risk and mutations from the virus. So they're saying we're consulting too much and not moving fast enough at government level.
Partly they might be correct, but not totally correct, because the issue here, they might be correct to say, if this variant comes very hard, and then we have what we used to have, the stop and go, which we had in the economy, definitely our economy is not going to be able to grow. That's what we are trying to avoid if we are vaccinating people in mass, we are vaccinating the workers in mass. But at the same time, we need to be careful that we don't just impose and we find resistance and not allow for further engagement and convincing and persuasion of the people. It might undo everything we wanted to do. For instance, you can do it in some of the workplaces. How are you going to do it in the taxi ranks? How are you going to do it in some of the open spaces and so on? So these are some of the things which we have to deal with as we're dealing with this particular issue. So mass mobilization, involving all the institutions, all the NGOs, is going to be very helpful when we go beyond the workplace.
So as you say, at this stage, it's all very initial levels of conversation, many ideas still coming in, and there are deliberations going on. And I'm wondering if we're looking at a future in South Africa where we may face a situation where companies, employers, let's say, for example, if you're going to work in a hospital where you're seeing patients, or in retail, there may have to be a clause in the employment contract that stipulates specifically on issues of COVID-19 vaccination.
I don't think it will go to that extent. At this stage, we're still talking about maybe some policies, some regulations in the companies which we'll have to deal with in terms of their rules and regulations around health and safety. But we need to be extra careful. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting with litigation after litigation, and that's what we do not want.
Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi, good to speak to you, sir. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you very much, sir.